Hello everyone, my name is Max Taylor. I'm a member of the Hopi tribe from the village of Smopavi. Glad to be here with you all. My presentation today is edible plants of Hopi. I'll be talking about some of the important information that you need to know about these plants. So the first slide here, important plant information to know. For the native people, I think the cultural names are very important and the plant uses. Soil type is very important to know also as it grows in different types of soil. You might have sandy soils, clay soils, and sandy sand soils, or there's other types of soils that these plants might grow in. And the seasons are also very important as yes, the winter, spring, summer, and fall. And all these plants grow in different types, sometimes within even several seasons. And the plant types, you could have annuals, biennials, or perennial type plants. And all of these plants can be collected differently. The plants that I'll be talking about are still in use today by the Hopi people and still collected. The first plant here is Standea albescens, commonly named as desert plume, and in Hopi we call this Ishe. The soil type that it grows in is your clay soils, pretty heavy clay soils. And this plant is a biennial as it grows early December, usually flowering by March. By that time in March, the leaves are pretty big and that's what we collect. And the leaves are edible and it can make a type of spinach out of it. But this plant, you need to be careful to not pull the whole plant. What I usually do is collect parts of the plant, always leaving some leaves on it for it to continue to collect photosynthesis and then grow to maturity and produces seeds. And that way you have plants for the following year. But this plant is really dependent on snow moisture. With the snow moisture, this plants will be abundant. And also this plant is from the mustard family. The second plant here is Yucca angustissima, commonly known as the narrow-leaf yucca. In Hopi we call this moha. And the soil type that it grows in is sandy soils, sandy loam, and is a perennial plant. And it grows year-round. But in the springtime, this plant will produce flower buds and then producing fruit, all of which are edible. The flower bulbs are edible, and even the young seed fruit are edible. And of course, the roots are used traditionally, culturally, for shampoo. And the leaves are also very important as they are used for cordage and for basketry. So this is a very important plant. And some of the management that we need for this plant is grazing management, as the cattle will eat the fruit and the flower stalks. And a lot of times before they flower, they have a tender center that the cows will pull out and eat. And if that happens, and they'll prevent it from flowering and producing more seeds. So grazing management, I think, is really important for this plant to be productive. Another important plant we have here is the Monarda pectinata, commonly known as bee balm. In Hopi, we call this nanakupsi. This plant is a spice plant, and the soil type that I usually find it growing is a sandy loam type soil. And this plant is an annual, and will usually come out pretty early in the season, maybe around March, April, and flowering by July. This plant is kind of rare to Hopi, as you don't find it a lot of places. It grows in only select few sites. So some of the areas that we usually go collect is along the Coconino National Forest, and that's some of the traditional picking areas for the Hopi. They make trips out there to collect these plants, but because it's now federal lands and they require permits a lot of times to collect anything in the Forest Service, and that becomes a problem for our people. They don't really understand that you need to get a permit from the Forest Service. And that's where some of the trouble begins. People getting citations or they get warnings, and that later on prevents people from going out to collect this plant. So I think that's where we need to work across the border to have it available to our native peoples. Another important plant is this Amaranthus rhytii. The common name I don't have, but in Hopi we call this wiwa. This amaranth usually grows around late summer following heavy monsoon rains, and it grows in sandy soils, deep sandy soils. At a young stage, this plant is really succulent. It's really tender and one of the best tasting spinach that you can collect. But as it dries toward the fall, it becomes hard as tumbleweed, and even the flower stalks on it becomes pretty spiny as it starts to mature. And I think with this one also needs grazing management, because the livestock will really eat this plant up right away if they find it, as it's really succulent. Another plant here is Solanum jamesii, commonly named as the wild potato, and in Hopi we call this tumna. This plant grows in clay soils along the floodplains, and the seed tubers of this plant are viable for a long time, but it needs summer monsoon rains and then flooding along the floodplains for it to produce. And I think some of the problems that we have with it right now is that some of these floodplains are getting pretty incised, getting deeply incised, where we don't get the running over the banks. So a lot of times these plants are dormant until you get exceedingly a big flood that will go over the banks, and you'll see the abundance of this plant. And as you can see in the little inset, there's little potatoes that we collect, and which is edible. And some of the important grass plants that our ancestors collected, we don't collect them as much as they did back then, but which is still really important as far as grazing, and also again still collecting the seeds. Echinacea hymenoides, commonly known as Indian rice grass, and we call this plant lehu. As you can see in the big picture, this picture was taken in 2017 when we pretty much had regular rainy summers. But since that time, 2018, we experienced one of our worst droughts, and at that time I started to see some of these plants, the roots were getting pretty weak, and I knew they would not survive. And within this last few years with the severe drought we've been having, this plant is pretty much gone off the range, not really to overgrazing or anything. I think it's just drought related. And the little inset picture that you see there, it's in the same area. And today, what most of you see is gaeta. That's the vegetation that's there. All your Indian rice grass, your sand drop seeds are gone. So with the drought is the major factor that's impacting Indian rice grass at this point, and along with the sand drop seeds. Another important plant is the Spiralis oroides, commonly known as alkali secatone, and in Hopi we call this nene. As you can see in this picture, it's in a little floodplain. It's heavy clay soils, and this plant is perennial. With growth like that, it's really easy to collect a pound of seeds within maybe an hour or two. It's abundant. I usually hand collect it in this area. But again, with the drought starting since about 2018, with a little inset picture there, that's what this area looks like today. It's the drought has really taken it out, along with kind of unmanaged grazing in this area. So grazing management is really important for this plant. I know this plant, if it's used down to about 60%, the stem gets pretty spiny, and it usually prevents cattle from grazing it all the way down. But because of the lack of other forage, the cows have really gotten all the way down close to 80-90% of this plant, and along with the drought, it's just pretty much killed some of this vegetation. So I think grazing management is one of the biggest tools that we can use to help this plant also. As we talk about some of the things in this symposium, I think management and collaboration are some of the topics that we need to really work on. And I think from the tribes, sharing traditional ecological knowledge is really important. I'm not familiar with the Grand Staircase-Escalante, what really goes there, but I'm sure we have similar plants, and the different tribes that are involved in this symposium, they have this knowledge that we can all share to help one another. I think one of the important things to do and to learn is practicing to harvest sustainably. That's because some of these plants are seed dependent. We need to not collect everything, but always leaving some for it to continue. And part of the traditional ecological knowledge is the plant needs. We've been here for thousands of years, and we've lived with these plants, and they've survived up to this point. They need this human interaction and manipulations. I really feel that these plants, they know the purpose they're here, and they need to be here with us. And being among these plants, I feel that they appreciate this human interaction and manipulation. We just need to learn to be more sustainable. And I think that's about all I have for this presentation. I want to say thank you for inviting me to this symposium. Thank you. And enjoy nature's harvest.